know, my father, who's an entertainer, wrote a song called Word Up. And it was about the language. It was about someone saying, word up, right? That was the language of our street.
When I talk to people and I ask them about that, ask them about what blackness is, what black language is to them, what does sounding black mean to them, more often than not, it's about a sound and a rhythm, this sort of movement and fluidity. It's sort of imbued with this cultural richness.
Language is music. They say picture is worth 1,000 words, but you know, I feel like I grew up in an environment where a person could use a few words and it felt like 1,000 pictures.
I'm afraid it's one of the great dilemmas, one of the great psychological hazards of being an American Negro. One's born in a white country where one was once a slave, where all the standards, none of it applies to you. Obviously I hadn't always talked the way I had forced myself to learn how to talk. I realized it was a cadence, it was a beat. It was not a question of dropping S's or N's or G's, but a question of the beat, really. It's that tone and that sound, you know, which is in me.
What defines talking black? That's the real question to me, because talking black to me is an insult when you say you're talking black or you're talking white. Because I choose to pronounce my words. I'm not talking black. I'm totally black. I'm black.
Yeah.
So every word that comes out of my mouth is me talking.
Yeah, but
so I'm talking black.
But you're not talking black because you don't sound black while you're talking.
And that's my point. And I'm offended by that. What do you mean I don't sound black? I'm black, so I sound just as black as you do.
While I think anybody who's African American, you speak African American language because it's about you, the person, being African American, what you use. At the same time, I'm sort of pushed on that notion when I hear people or know that people exist who don't really seem to sound in a particular way.
I'm told all the time if somebody answers the phone, oh, I thought you were a white boy. What was that supposed to mean? I'm speaking the way that my family spoke. But did I know the language? Do I know another language? Yeah, I know another language.
It's just like anything else. It's surely as a kid learns how to use words, they learn how to use them in the ways that they're being used.
What is it you know when you know African American English, when you know it as a system, when you use it as your native language? Speakers of African American English, from my particular viewpoint, are those speakers who grow up in African American English speaking communities.
Many people assume that black English is one thing. All black people speak it pretty much the same way. There are many, many types of black English here in the United States.
Certainly there are differences that are regional differences, but I think there's some core aspect, and I think that's shared by many, many, many speakers of African American English. But as a speaker who grew up in Southwest Louisiana, I do things with African American English that I might not expect my counterparts who grew up in some other areas to do.
If I walk up to him, I say, what's up? I'm speaking. I'm saying, hey, how you doing? I ran into some guys from New York up there in the middle of here, and we're in our big Burger King getting something to eat. I'm standing in the line. They stand beside me. I was like, what's up? And he just turned to me like, what's up? You know, to them, what's up means, I'm like, no, I was speaking. I'm from Mississippi.
I mean, between Cali, St. Louis, Chicago, Detroit, Philly, New York, you'll get a different greeting, and that's just the start. I can go down to Atlanta and say, you know, what it do? Detroit, what up, though? New York, what's up, son? Cali, what up, blood? You better be careful where you at if you say blood, though. But they know if you say what's up, blood, it's family.
Well, I'm from a place where we don't use the dialect that I use here, but I'm able to maneuver with it. So you might hear, what up, shorty? What up, though? You know, and I'll just give them something that I have from Detroit. It'd be like, what up, shorty? I'd be like, what up, though? Or if you go to New Orleans and say, well, hey, Wody. The language gives you access and it'll give you a barrier. So the best thing to do is use it for your access.
I am from an African American background, but I went to a predominantly white school. And even when I was younger, my black family members would make fun of me and call me white girl. White girl, you talk like a white girl, you talk like a white girl, because they lived in a more urban area and I lived in the suburbs. So all my life it's kind of been this, I talk like this with this group of people, and then I talk like this with this group of people.
I think a lot of people are surprised at how much individual speakers can actually shift. I use sort of mainstream ways of talking so much in my professional life that a lot of people doubt that I actually speak any other way. But when I'm outside that professional setting, it really is sort of my language of comfort. It's my language of home. It's my language of family. It's my language of friendship. I think you can look at middle-class speakers and assume that they don't speak African-American vernacular English because all I'm hearing is standard English. But what happens is that a lot of middle-class speakers do what I like to call code switching. I consider myself to be a code switcher, but I don't spend a lot of time thinking now I will use the vernacular. So this is a girlfriend that I'm talking to.
Because let me tell you, that daycare tuition ain't no joke. It ain't no joke. Yeah. But I only got a few more months, girl, and we'll be out. A few more months. This is it for us, girl.
And so the last one is me with my mom.
Where you from? I was like, Columbia. What part of Columbia you don't know about hags? I was like, the suburbs? And he thought that was just so funny. But I'm like, I don't know nothing about no doggone hags.
With any kind of code switching, I think it happens below the level of conscious awareness.
When I'm talking to my sisters, it's very casual, it's very comfortable. But when I'm talking to, other people, or when I'm talking to professors, it's like, for them, it's like I'm a different person. And it makes you self-conscious, and it makes you feel, for me, as though I was not necessarily being true to myself or being black. But then you come to find that it's okay to kind of meet people where they are.
It's so interesting, this issue of identity, language, acceptance, and inclusion or exclusion. I want to be included, so I will use a certain type of language. Who wants to be excluded?
You have this kind of complex push in which, on the one hand, the language is vibrant, it's fulfilling, it's expressive, it's enjoyable, and on the other hand, you have African Americans dealing with the larger society, getting pushback, getting misunderstanding.
Unless you have your own company, or you're a rapper, or you're an athlete with vernacular, you are going to be pushed out of opportunities and marginalized. For survival, economic survival, I'm gonna have to do that song and dance.
African American English has a place, but for the most part, it's always relegated to entertainment and rap music, R&B, things like that, but it's not okay outside of those realms.
The game only changes if you can commodify certain aspects of culture in disadvantaged communities. But the game doesn't really change when it comes to the different things that we see as professional and managerial. They're changing in the sense that they're allowing more of us in who were historically excluded. But in order to be in, we have to read the cultural codes of that space.
I enjoy the nuances of how they speak and how I speak, and I'm not changing me, but I'm also grown. I do tell them, and I'm very transparent and honest about the fact that you live in a world where you do need to translate, and you do need to code switch, and you do need to speak King's English, and you do need to make sure that you're able to navigate the systems, right? Because there is privilege, and that does exist.
It was always very contentious about what we should do with student language. They need to have standard English in order to be successful in school the way it's set up right now. But there was a lot of times a real negative, people talked about student language in a really negative way. That came not just from white teachers, but that came from African American teachers. It came from parents. It came from societal messages.
Me telling you what you just said is said incorrectly is like telling you that your mama is not smart. what I just said, my mom said to me. That's where I got it from, or my dad, or my people, or whatever. If I said, that's not how smart people talk, because that's what teachers say, right? That's not the correct way to say that. Then what you're not saying is that everybody in my life doesn't speak correctly, right? What you're not saying is that everybody other than you, right, is wrong, which can't be right.
People have the impression that African American English is nothing more than a collection of errors because that's how they've been socialized. If it's not standard English, it's wrong. So we have this framework that all of us have been indoctrinated into. There's a right and a wrong in language. Language itself is always right because there's always a systematicity, a patterning to it.
All stigmatized languages usually have this false reputation of having no structure or having no grammar.
What does standard English accomplish that these so-called versions of substandard English don't accomplish in terms of communication? Nothing. You know what I mean? Nothing at all. Anything that seems to stand in the way, you say, oh, it'll help you get a job. Well, is that because of the language? It's not that you're unable to communicate, or is that because of all these various isms that stand in the way of you being able to take care of yourself?
That's the one thing that people don't understand the most. This is not random. People are not making mistakes. People are not confused about a rule. They are governed by a different set of rules.
In African American language, you can say things like, he happy, or John tall, or he the man. You might say, well, okay, folks are just leaving out is or are. But they're not just leaving it out. In language, nothing is ever just like random. You can just leave it out or put it in. No, there's a very, very strict set of rules. Like there's some places where you can't leave it out.
You will hear speakers say quite often, you know, he nice, he running. But you wouldn't hear those speakers say, I nice, I running. And you can see these patterns emerging as children are developing African American English. So people don't wake up at 15 and just start speaking African American English. This is a system that's really in place early on, and children are working it out as they become older.
Let me give you a different example that people talk about a lot. You can say, you know, John be studying Saturday nights, okay? Now, a lot of people think that that be is just like is in English. I could look at somebody sitting in front of me and I could say, you know, John's sitting down right now. But I can't say, John be sitting down right now. Be always means that something happens habitually, frequently, and so on.
It's a whole bunch of people in New York that we know, and the way they be talking and stuff. You
acquire it as part of the normal human facility of acquiring a language.
A lot of times people assume that there is some linguistic basis for, you know, the stigma against a variety. And they're not aware that it really is about the people.
The issue, Mr. Chairman, has received a lot of attention all over the United States. And I simply want to say that I think Ebonics is absurd.
In the mid-90s, 1995, 1996, there was the big Ebonics controversy. The Oakland School Board was trying to get what had been fairly solidly established linguistic research into schools.
Many linguists have stated that Oakland's decision is credible, it is rational, and a potentially effective way to improve the academic standard of its students.
And the public really misunderstood the message of what was happening and reacted in ways that kind of set back what educators were trying to do with language.
That's just bad English, isn't it? How could you say that's a language?
No, that's different English.
No,
that's
it's
not
bad
English. That's not,
English.
but that's your opinion that it's bad. No, it's not
A lot of teachers just kind of take what they've heard, sort of the predominant social narratives, and they just sort of, you know, reproduce them. When we start being more critical of those, when teachers start thinking about it more closely, then we've got a lot more opportunities to help kids.
I'm really actually quite tickled when I move into classroom spaces and I see how facile kids are with language, even if they're not you know, adept as we measure it on a test with standard English, but they are so adroit at moving back and forth and talking to one another and volleying. And we don't know how to like fold that kind of energy, that kind of skill into the test that we're using to evaluate them, that then has some serious consequences for their mobility in American society.
Because language and identity are so closely tied, if we value more language, then we also value more student ways of being within schools.
This country, if this person says he be going to work.
The average citizen who encountered the term of Ebonics during the Oakland controversy did so at a time when late night talk show hosts were, you know, lampooning the term. And as a professional linguist, I was disheartened when I saw so many people mocking a term that referred to linguistic circumstances that I think should be better understood by the entire nation, but which have been the object of linguistic discrimination since the inception of slavery. Slave descendants have a unique linguistic heritage in comparison to every other immigrant group that came to this country. African slaves, when they were captured, were often isolated linguistically from others that spoke their own mother tongue while they were on the west coast of Africa. That linguistic isolation was also maintained on the ships during the Atlantic crossing. And as a result of that, not one indigenous African language has survived the Atlantic crossing intact. Once they got here, it was illegal to teach them to read and write. For hundreds of years, slaves were denied access to education. As a result of that, many of the linguistic stereotypes, many of the negative linguistic stereotypes that people embrace regarding African American English, dismissing it as, you know, the language of someone who's being lazy or not attending to language, doesn't fully appreciate the linguistic isolation that slave descendants experienced is unlike any other immigrant group in this country.
When they were brought here, African Americans were segregated into plantations. That's what happened in the Caribbean also. And what they did was to invent new languages, new varieties, taking linguistic properties from the surrounding varieties and creating new forms. These are creations of people put in an absolutely horrible set of circumstances. And out of that milieu came new language forms.
We're standing on an island where we know 40% of all people of color that were taken and survived the Middle Passage, that arrived in North America, first step foot on North American soil right here on this island of Sullivan's Island. Any vessel coming into the New World, coming into the port of Charleston, were required to quarantine their cargo, African cargo, human cargo, here on this island for approximately 10 days. Then they would be taken into Charleston and to be sold as part of the African slave trade. And then now their labor, their talents, their gift, and their skills would now be diffused across the low country of South Carolina and Georgia, North Carolina, and Florida as well.
Margie, she was nice. She said, Lord, I'm so in luck. She come in the evening time, she have to come and get them kids. Them kids won't go in them. She'll be here, and this time so she here. Then she know if she don't go home, she's right here with me.
Gullah is an African-American language variety spoken along the coasts of South Carolina and Georgia. Gullah is a Creole variety. Linguists use that term to refer to languages that emerge in situations of contact between speakers who have no common language among them.
Mess up things up here. Yeah, I done go and mess up. Because you know one thing, y'all is shout, and y'all is say things up here, and people ain't know why y'all saying them. They ain't know how come y'all say what y'all say, this, that, and it means.
Once upon a time, you know, us had a language all we own.
We had a language all
I remember it like yesterday.
I remember like it was yesterday.
When I first had to go to school.
First went to school.
You know what I done the night before?
The night before?
I went down yonder to the shiffer room.
To the dresser.
There's some controversy over where African American English comes from, but one side of that debate, of course, is that it was once a Creole-like variety, a Gullah-like Creole.
When I grew up, all my grandmother, my mother, my father, my aunts, and everybody spoke the same language, so you didn't know a difference because you grew up in a community where everybody's speaking the same language. And my mother is 73 years old, and she speaks Gullah, and my sisters and brothers, all of us speak Gullah, but we don't realize we speak in Gullah. It's just a natural language to us.
You know, when a stranger come to your door, you say, "What wanna come here for?" Why did you come here? And, oh, we glad for see una. We glad una come for see we.
I really recognized it when I left home and went to college. I realized that, oh, these people talk funny. And they realized with me too, I talk funny. But it's they call it broken language, but we say broken to who.
As we continue to educate the public about this culture, then the public would, the outside public would then accept it. And we would feel accepted.
We, Papa in heaven, let everybody honor your name because you're the holy. We pray that soon you go on rule of the we. What's the big thing you want? Let it be in this world like same like it be there in heaven. Give we the food this day and every day. Forget the bad thing we to do, because we forget them that do bad to we.
We are the Gullah kinfolk all the way across the water. Because whether you know it or not, you was Gullah kinfolk. Because it's the blending of all of those cultures that came together during that transatlantic slave trade. So turn to your neighbor and say, cousin, oh cousin. This is a family reunion, a family reunion.
The rhythm of it is very much like Caribbean English Creoles. And so a lot of times, my husband, for example, is from Jamaica and now living in South Carolina, and we'll often hear a Gullah Geechee speaker and assume that they're from Jamaica or from the Caribbean.
People don't understand, but Jamaicans are the same. They come from Africa also, but it's just that they went to the Caribbean side of the area when we came for this, this side of the border. So we still speak the same kind of language, but we just have a different dialect.
African Americans are trying to say, who am I? Who am I? And so they're always looking back, right? They're looking to Africa. No, I say before you get to Africa, you got to get to the Caribbean.
No matter who you is in this world, empty hand you come and empty hand you leave. You're not going to pack up. Nothing out here.
We don't really have the record to know what exactly happened in the 17th century or the 18th century. So we have to look at language to give us, language can give us some indication.
I think there definitely are connections between African American language and the language of the Caribbean. The South Carolina and Georgia Sea Islands are the one place where there was consistently for a long time very high numbers of Africans. Black and in particular African ways of life and speaking was much stronger there as it was in parts of Jamaica.
A lot of the early African Americans were coming from the Caribbean rather than directly from Africa. Since, for example, Charleston, South Carolina, founded in 1670 as a colony of Barbados, there have been other connections, so I don't find it surprising that there are similarities, that there are things that show up in the Caribbean and in the U.S.
So that's the beauty about it. The way they're behaving, the way they're using the language is very systematic and is bearing out the patterns, the footprints of history. That's what culture is all about, cultural inheritance. You do things, but you don't really know exactly why.
If we look at what I refer to as Africanisms that remain in Bahamian culture, we are an African people. You really see it coming out in the foodways, and you also see it in the language. And we want to ensure that our children are aware and know that they have a very, very rich legacy and history. Emphasizing that will go a long way in terms of helping children to know who they are.
It's really important to be able to show the connection between African American English and Caribbean English Creoles. The one thing I think about African Americans and Caribbean Americans is the longing to know. The longing to know, who am I? How did I get here? Who are my people? Linguistics just gives you that little extra something that you go like, okay, I get it. I belong somewhere. I'm connected to something.
Oh yeah, man. Well, I was gone on the road. I was gone a long time. Well, when I come back home, my baby still says she's mine. Still says she's mine. Still says she's mine. It was my grandfather, my grandmother. I got to listen to them talking about things that you had to get from black people. Their age. When Lincoln freed the slaves, we supposed to have been free, but you wasn't. If you was in the North, you was kind of free. If you was in the South, you weren't free at all. You done worked all the year for the people you're working for. You still ain't got nothing. You owe them. You can't go nowhere. You can't leave. This is the struggle that you're going through.
So in the early part of the 20th century, the South was mainly rural, and about 90% of the African American population was living in the rural South. You had Jim Crow laws, you had institutional segregation. However, you had a lot of contact because they shopped in the same general stores, they worked alongside each other as tenant farmers in the fields. So you had linguistic contact there. So what we consider to be now present-day African American vernacular English is quite different than what we saw in speakers who were born, say, 100 years ago.
Wherever there were African slaves, they contributed to shaping American English. And then came Jim Crow, and then the Great Migration, and something that had emerged in the southeastern part of the United States was spread.
One town that won't let you down, it's my kind of town. And you can play like this.
For me, the Great Migration is captured in the stories about how lynching in the South and a lack of opportunities drove folks to pack up trucks and vans and suitcases and foot lockers in hopes of achieving a better life here in the North. They started coming just before World War I, and they didn't stop until maybe around the 1970s.
I don't think that African Americans at that time called it a migration. They called it an exodus. And on the cover of the Defender, that's what it says, Exodus. And that's how they left with the hope of finding a promised land, specifically coming here to work, and finding a whole different level of segregation and racism that wasn't what they had experienced in the South, where you couldn't live next door to a white person or a white family. So that over the 3 waves of the migration, literally 500,000 people were confined to living in one area.
Why does Black English exist? Isolation. For a population to develop its own variety of language, there has to be some kind of apartness. Whenever people are apart, they diverge culturally and linguistically.
In the period of the Great Migration, which started around World War I and continued till after World War II, you had a mass exodus of people leaving the South. Then you had African Americans living in concentrated areas in these urban areas of the North, but they didn't have the same kind of contact that they had had previously with the white population.
You had 300,000 people scrammed into a narrow band of land at its height. So you had people in kitchenettes and piled on top of one another, commerce everywhere, restaurants, clubs, businesses, etc. And so you had a very vibrant, though repressed community, it was a very vibrant community.
These blacks came from the South and brought with them the linguistic properties that in their speech that they learned in the South.
A good majority of the African Americans in this community, their families originated from the South. They migrated here. I'd say 4 out of 5 people that you see that be African American in this community, probably if you go back 2 generations, their family was from the South, you know.
This area here is the entering stage of that early period of the limits of the black community, close to the downtown area. And in this general area, jazz and blues, coming up from New Orleans and other places, became elevated. In this confined, segregated area, there was accomplishment. This was a dividing line. On that side, I could go and do whatever I wanted to do. On this side, I better not come. Just across the street. Okay, now we're getting into another era, and this is the beginning of public housing.
They contained us within the Black Belt, and rather than let us expand out geographically, they went up vertically. Public housing literally cordoned off the entire Black Belt all the way around in a 360-degree radius. That's how hard they worked to contain us within that Black Belt.
In the first 2 decades of research, linguists were divided in their views of the origin of African American English, whether it was a southern regional dialect descended from non-standard English and Irish dialects, or the descendant of a Creole grammar similar to that spoken in the Caribbean. Research on the language of ex-slaves showed that some of the most prominent features of the modern dialect were not present in the 19th century. African American vernacular English is becoming not less, but more different from other dialects.
In the mid-1960s, we did a large language study in Detroit and interviewed over 700 residents. It became immediately obvious there were 2 worlds of dialects. One participated in by the white population and another participated in by the black population, and became immediately clear these are 2 different linguistic worlds. It was both shocking and intriguing.
As a child in the hood, it was all black. And the only time we seen white people was we went a town over and they owned the stores. It wasn't a shared cultural kind of exchange going on. We communicated with the black vernacular, with how we communicate to make it cool, make it fly, make it dope, to give you that hood pass. So you had to learn that.
Why do kids growing up in the black community have to become skilled at language use? The community requires it. The culture requires it. If you can't defend yourself verbally growing up in a black community, a traditional black community, then everybody else picks on you. You're forced to develop, you could think of them as verbal defenses. I prefer to think of them as verbal skills. If you grow up in that kind of language environment, you come to like it and appreciate it.
Oh, here we go. What's poppin'? It's Q Cody. Got my man Uncle P with me. Just want to see him a C.O.D.Y act like you know me. Click pile if you click foul. Detroit, we in here. Make some noise. Let's go, let's go, let's go, let's go.
Call your girl, she hit me back like you rang. I'm the hottest thing you sang.
You basic, dude, you tripping. Lace your shoes, think again, deja vu. Play with me, you play the loop.
An individual's ability to speak spontaneously, authoritatively, in the vernacular is not only highly prized, but is literally used in verbal combat.
Some people call it shooting, some people call it bagging, some people call it capping, some people refer to it as the dozens, but I mean, it's just this idea of like verbal one-upsmanship.
Look at the crowd, they eyes glued like they got lashes on in the draft zone. I'm with some mean boys, run up deep in the Jaheim voice, while you at the crib with your son watching Nickelodeon Teen Choice.
You often throw a lot of negative shots at each other, and they're not necessarily genuine. You know what I mean? It's all friendly competition.
There's no boundaries, you know. I've heard all the type of jokes, all the type of like direct blazes on somebody might call it blazing. With us, it didn't have to be like, you know, I hate you and boom, boom. It's just, we just battled with words, you know.
It's as much about the language itself and the connections that are being made as it is about like how the language, like how it's being delivered.
Who got them bars on deck though? Let me hit some bars on deck. What's your name, homie?
Y'all want to hit the ciphers? All right, my name Flex Benz.
Tell them what your name is.
All right, my name Flex Benz. I'm 15 years old, and I'm straight out of Detroit, Michigan. All right, y'all want to hit the cipher on it?
Man, kick.
Come on, y'all got it. Come on.
Do your thing.
Come on. Hey. Every time I step in the booth, I'm telling the truth. I bring certain O to the youth, like lavender coats. I'm doing the fool.
Just because you're the baby daddy, you ain't my damn baby. I don't know you nothing, and you don't need it so willingly. Give me a damn thing. If we can't be friends, then we can't co-parent and honest.
That barrel, you rolling in flame, torching again. Victor and here again, then I'll appear again.
I'm a head in with my brethren, blunt with me all the time like a best friend. Grind till it's red beans, different red lens, put the lead in, chop around like it's Columbine with my concubine. People gotta grind.
As much slang as we use in hip hop, there are probably more people that would have been English majors or writers in hip hop than there is in any other genre. Just the usage of words like metaphors, similes, double entendres, triple entendres. You might not even have a high school diploma, and you know how to use these things.
People think that African American English is picking up these things from hip hop, when in fact hip hop is making use of long-standing features of African American English.
The very first band that ever introduced hip hop was the Sugar Hill Gang. The Sugar Hill Gang was kind of a popular disco group that, you know, was presenting, you know, kind of lighthearted music. But then Grandmaster Flash produced a song called The Message. And The Message was one of the most powerful hip hop songs ever produced because it talked about life in the inner cities and broken glass and drug addicts and drive-by shootings. These things are connected to at least some of the anger that is conveyed by hip-hop artists. And it's a means of expression that is not only accepted within African American culture, but it's now spread far beyond and is actually often used by young people in various parts of the world that wish to express defiance to authority.
Speak if you know what you're worth. Seek if you know what you're worth. Teach so they know what they worth. Sneak if they taking your birthright, so pursuing the hurt.
I know that for some people it truly is therapy. You look out and everything you see around you is destructive, it becomes an outlet.
When you find something that gives you an opportunity to express what's going on around you, it's a relief and it's a creative like spark. That's why you have MCs that rap about fancy cars, and you know, we criticize these MCs a lot. We say, oh, he's rapping about things that he doesn't have or things that he wants, but it's things that we aspire. We're the same kids that sat on our grandma's porch and said, that's my car. So when we rap about that's my car, it comes from somewhere. And where it comes from is like having nothing. It gives that kid that didn't have anything something.
And then I grew up in the church. There would be all this improvisation they would do. The spirit is taking over and all sorts of stuff is going on. I mean, they're just like kicking out these lyrics and talking about their lives like on the fly, on the spot. And that just, you know, like that is really when I became aware of hip hop culture and freestyle as a part of it.
The preacher has to be very nimble and understanding where all of the people are. It's important to speak vernacular, especially to get a point across or to utilize humor. And then there are others that want to see that moment of improvisation where the spirit takes over and you fly from the page and something unique is created in the process of communication.
That's what people expect in service. They expect communication to take place in church, in the language of the people, whether that's northern, urban, whether that's southern, rural, whether that's low country, Geechee, Gullah. Being able to communicate in the language of the hearers in a way that they understand and the way that they feel that they are part of that congregation becomes crucial.
He came into my life, yeah, he spoke to my dying soul.
The oral tradition and language are key, they're central. Without language, you would have no black church because it had been against the law to teach Africans how to read or write. The oral tradition and the oral tradition were the sum and substance of the black church.
She's right here, right now, right before us.
It's a give and take, it's a dialogue that goes on. Call and response. The preacher says something, the congregation says something back. That's very different from European worship. They don't say anything back. In fact, they're taught not to say anything. That's disruptive. You're disrupting service. Missionaries taught us that. You don't disrupt service. Be quiet and let the minister finish.
Let me break it down. Nobody is dismantling schools in Lincoln Park. No one is dismantling schools in any wealthy area in Chicago.
One of the things, the differences between African speech and European speech is European speech, like tonight on the news, talking heads. That's it from Channel 5. What do you say, Sue? What do you say, Bob? Right? When black people talk, they get involved with the body. The body is a part of the speech event. Homiletics, when I was back in school, said, no, you don't do that. That distracts from the message.
For our community, we come out of an oral culture, and movements that are transformative in our community always have people who are able to communicate with oral power and dexterity and improvisation and communicate head and heart and spirit and allow those words to take life and flight in the hearts of God's people.
When we allow freedom ring, when we let it ring from every village and every hamlet, from every state and every city, we will be able to speed up that day when all of God's children, black men and white men, Jews and Gentiles, Protestants and Catholics, will be able to join hands and sing in the words of the old Negro spiritual, free at last, thank God Almighty, we are free at last.
MLK was one of the most powerful speakers ever, and his speeches are incredibly rhetorically profound. So of course he was educated, and therefore he tended to avoid features of speech that were socially stigmatized, so he tended not to use those traditional vernacular forms. But at the same time, whatever speech, to whatever group, he was identifiably African American, and he was also identifiably Southern and urban. So these are really noteworthy stances that he took, in a sense saying the power of what I have to say is transformative, and I'm going to say it in an authentic voice for me. And so what stands out from King is his rhetorical power and his social and political voice, and the fact that it was framed in African American identity and Southern identity is one of the great lessons about the authority and the authenticity of speaking Black in America.
Been a great change, seen a lot of changes. I tell my children, I tell him about it. A little history, they didn't even know about that. It wasn't easy, somebody had to pay the way for them. That's right.
The language has changed considerably from the time when I was growing up opposed to now. I mean, don't get me wrong, these young kids is unbelievable with the modern technology.
Everybody get to the dance floor for this one. We're about to turn up grandma, granddaddy, grandpapa, mama, father, sister. Let's do it. Slide like this, go like this. Please don't do your toe like this. Yeah.
A lot of language and a lot of swag, slang, lingo, however you call it, you know, originated from Atlanta. But they kind of originate from other cities as well. But as far as Atlanta, as far as the phrase turn up, which we're not even on no more, it's pipe up. But by the time y'all even see this, we're gonna be on to the next thing.
If I wanna tell him something, like if I need to tell him something, but I ain't trying to let everybody know until I'm like, hey, fool, we need to go handle business. Like if I say we finna go handle business, we really just finna go off and talk about some stuff we don't need nobody else to know about. Like they say this a lot, they'll be like, I'm finna slab to the crib, and slab to the crib mean, oh, I'm finna go home.
All of them don't talk alike. So that makes me have to tell them, kind of straighten it up a little bit before I understand it. Because I got some grandchildren, I can't hardly understand them. I said, wait, babe. I said, Granddaddy trying to understand you.
Rural kids who used to be much more regionalized want to sound more urban because it's more hip. And so the old-time rural styles of African Americans, which tend to be more closely aligned with Southern white varieties, are now moving away and becoming much more urban, and actually in some ways more like the urban North and some of the Southern urban areas, for example, like Atlanta and so forth.
You know, we know as linguists, right, that who's the most important for the young people or their peers. Doesn't matter how older people speak around you, it's the peer group that's the main influence.
I came down here once and I started calling everybody Joe. Because in Chicago, they call everybody Joe. And they was like, what you talking about? And I was like, my bad, y'all. Because I had stayed a whole summer. So I was calling everybody Joe. And I was like, hey, let me get this, yo. Like, I had developed like this. I don't even know where it was coming from. But I was around my cousins so much. And that was the way they were talking. So I guess I just picked up on it. When I got ready to come home, I was just still stuck in that city language.
So there's a kind of movement of urbanization so that young people in remote areas now are adopting more urban features because that's the cultural standard and the norm of what is cool.
And this is my boom, 97.5, 102.9, DJ Nabs going live. This is my boom, 97.5, 102.9, DJ Nabs going live.
Myself, Shaka Zulu, and a few other people who were hired to be on hip-hop radio in 1997, right? Were invited on BET with Tavis Smiley.
and it was called BET Talks. And it was talking about the change in radio, like the changing of the guard. Like it had changed from the old school days of black radio, where radio guys talk like this, you know, welcome to the show, it's WKBC, W so-and-so, can you dig it, blah, blah, blah. And it became, yo, you know what it is? You know, it was that hip hop language, is the way we talked and spoke. You know, we're just speaking our everyday language, but that was different from the language of radio prior to that period of time. It was a change in language, but we wasn't thinking about it in that sense. It was just our music, just who we were. But to be on the radio playing these records and to be saying, yo, here's another dope joint from Schooly D, PSK, you know what it means, bang, and play the record. You know, if you wasn't in the culture, you didn't understand that.
What you think? Should we do it 80s style? Yeah.
The different culture may be more in the age bracket, because you know all the young guys talk a certain way, and most of the lingo comes up as new. The lingo we use is outdated now when we was coming up, so they come up with new words that mean the same thing.
It's a big divide, and it's between the elders and the youth. And what happens is the elders don't tend to want to understand what the youth are doing, and the youth are growing up in a world different than what the elders grew up in.
A lot of the language is changing, the music is changing, but it's like that one term or that one dance never changes. No matter what comes out in the music, they're always going to hear their father or their uncles have this greeting with each other, so when they grow up, that's their greeting. It's amazing how strong it is.
People of African descent have been moving from the beginning of time and interacting and transforming. I think there's some things that are constant, but I also think it's constantly transforming.
People may feel like the things that they're saying, regardless if it's considered, you know, improper English, that's what may make them feel the closest to home. So it's almost like, kind of like a special legacy.
For me, black language is natural. That's the language, the first language I speak. It's my first language. It's how my people adapted to whatever, having their language stripped away or having to put it together from different parts and pieces of different creoles, or it's what we did with what we had, and that is not just sufficient, it's more than enough. My hope is that we begin to see our language and everything else that we can do that way.
When I was a child, when whites would imitate black speech, it was often done in a racist way to make fun of the way that black people talked. Through time, and with the advent of hip-hop, you now see white kids in the suburban malls with their baseball caps on backwards. They're imitating black speech patterns, but they're doing so because they try to embrace the culture. Even though our culture has been the object of racist discrimination, it's also been embraced by American society as really being very cool. Our styles of speaking, our styles of dress, the way we dance, the music, the food, it's cool.
I was on the train 2 days ago going up to Harlem to see my sister. And so the train was packed and I was sitting on the train and there were two women talking. They had a lot of good energy. They must have been in their young 30s. And one was singing a song by Sir Mix-a-Lot. You know, she's going, baby got back, baby got back. And, you know, some people are very stiff in the train, but, you know, as you go closer to Harlem, people are loosening up. And there were 4 young men, and one of the young men said to her, and these are all, you know, shades of black people. One of the young men said to her, "Why are you singing that song? Why are you singing that song?" And she said, "I like that song." He said, "But why are you really singing that song?" And she said, she started singing her song again, "Baby got back, And she said, because around that time, I was young, and that song came out, and for the first time, I knew that I was okay. All of this was okay. And he was like, okay. And she said, so what's your story? What's your story? And so she went to each one. What's your story? You know, I'm from Harlem. I'm from Queens. I'm Dominican. Okay, Poppy, okay. And so you just saw all of the Black diaspora interacting and coming together and mixing and transforming right there in front of your eyes. And we got to 125th Street, and they were like, you know, I'll see you. And there was this just wonderful cadence and rhythm and impromptu articulation of who they were. And we got to 125th Street, and I just looked at my husband. I said, we're going to be okay. We're going to be okay if this is what is coming behind us.
Protect the women and the children, lions. We in the building if you tired of the struggling and the killing. Zion, we need some healing. I was born in them Killingville with a love act. It's really real, stressful like a skull cap. I got love for y'all, now run and tell that king of the jungle, yeah, we run.
Yo, frustrations are replacing emotions that I'm relating. Maybe you're mistaken my kindness for weakness. Nah, that's cool, there ain't no ill that I'm speaking. Seek me to inherit the earth. Speak if you know what you're worth. Seek if you know what you're worth. Teach so they know what they worth. Sneak if they taking your birthright. So pursuing the hurt, damn, pursuing the hurt for real, pursuing